Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Herrick. I hope you are safe and doing as well as possible during these times. Thank you for joining us for the first webinar panel of our AMIA Quarantine Stream series. The word is Quarantine Stream, so thanks, Brianna, for that word. Quarantine series, remote collections management programmed by AMIA's Continuing Education Advisory Task Force. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, CEA has programmed a series of webinars for the months of May and June with particular focus on managing the transition to working and learning remotely. So keep an eye out on the AMIA website and on social media for updates. I will talk a bit more about these at the end of today's webinar, and there should be, where we'll put up a link to those in the chat. As I said, my name is Andy Herrick. I'm the curator of film and media at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm working remotely from Chicago. And I'm proud to serve as one of the co-chairs of the task force with my co-host and very excellent co-chair, Brianna Toth, who will be moderating the Q&A today. I have the pleasure of introducing today's panelists, and Coco, who is the head of graphic arts collections at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences at the Margaret Herrick Library. Also at the amazing Margaret Herrick Library is Don Yaris, who is the head of library conservation at AMPAS, Katie Trainer, who is the film collections manager at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and Tiago Baptista, who is the director of the Cinemateca Portuguesa Conservation Center in Lisbon. I know, having just met them virtually, that I'm speaking for all the panelists, saying that we are very happy to be with you all during this time. So this is one of two panels, this one today and another one tomorrow at the same time. Each are 90 minutes with 1 hour of discussion amongst all the panelists and then 30 minutes for Q&A. And the idea with this is really a forum for AMIA members, for attendees, for anyone on it, to discuss how we're dealing with our collections during this time of working remotely and in the United States of civil unrest. So today our panel will focus on how people have grappled with access to physical and on-site collections during the pandemic. And so a lot of the questions, all the questions were written before a week ago. So they're going to focus on strategies for dealing with working remotely and caring for your collections during the pandemic. But as we all know, there's an expanded crisis going on right now in the United States. So briefly, I want to say, maybe during the Q&A or in some of the answers that the panelists might have, this is a chance, I think, to rethink and commit to why we collect the stuff we collect and how we care for it. So if we're going to be talking about workflows and conservation techniques, I also want to think about how that might relate to the larger issues of social justice and how things we're talking about in terms of caring for tracking the temperature and the humidity. How does that relate to issues of social justice, and how does that relate to the protests going on that are trying to fight for what's right for the memories of George Flood, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many others? So maybe that seems a little tenuous, but I think this is a chance to really think through why we care for the stuff we're caring for. There might be other questions we can talk about in terms of how budget issues constraints might be impacting us in the near future. So again, the questions are about working remotely during the pandemic, but I think there's other things we can talk about as well, and think about how conservation is connected to these larger issues. So a few housekeeping notes, and that this is to help us clarify how we can interact with each other during this webinar. I want to remind everyone that AMIA has a code of conduct, and that link is posted in the chat window, or it should be soon, I believe. Thank you, Brianna. If you have if you experience any technical difficulties with Zoom at any point during the session, please send the message through the chat feature so we can assist you. We ask and expect respectful and considerate communication with the presenters and each other in the chat window, as well as our live Q&A. To send questions to our panelists, please use the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you have a question that is directed at a specific person, please include their name with your question so we can direct it to them. If we don't get to your question right away, it will be directed to the individual or the presenters at a later time, and we can get that answer to you later. And there should be some information in the chat about that. And I'm seeing people checking in from Italy and the United Kingdom. The slides there will be a recording after the webinar, and that will be available afterwards. Which finally, please note this webinar is being recorded. It will be available next week, and as an attendee, you'll receive an email with the link and the password. It will be available on demand for those unable to attend. Our plan is to make it free to all AMIA members at a later date. So that is the introduction. So please join me in welcoming our panelists, Anne, Don, Katie, and Tiago, and we will now begin. So welcome, everyone. So we have a, hi, which this is my favorite thing about having meetings now in Zoom is we get to wave at each other and be friendly. So we've got a number of questions that all the panelists have received. The way we'll proceed is I will ask one panelist the question and then we can open it up to everyone else. So the first one I'm gonna ask to you, Anne. How did you receive news of having to close your archive and institution? And were you given any specifics as to closing completely or partially?
So it came in stages. I was looking last night. I have a note in my calendar on March 11th. We had our first internal meeting about what we were going to do, and actually, I think Dawn can correct me if I'm wrong here. I think at that meeting we determined that we were closing to the public. It was going to be effective the next day. So we came into work the next day, prepared to do some amount of work. And late that evening, we got an email to please stay at home. At that point, it was for 2 weeks. And that is where we have been since March, what would that be, the 13th? And we do not at this time have a return to the office date. I will put in a very quick little plug. If anybody out there is wanting our research services, those things are still available. So I would encourage you to reach out to us in that way. But there's been very little activity from the library side in terms of getting into the library to make sure everything is okay. That said, particularly within, and I need to address, you know, I'm part of the library staff, but most of my comments are going to be about the graphic arts department specifically. So we manage the library and the Academy's collection of posters and production art. My staff is fantastic about refiling things. So, you know, the fact that we're not there, I'm not freaked out about because I know everything is kind of where it should be. And that's, I think, where we are. Have I missed anything in responding to that question? I don't think so. We have the facility to if we have a compelling reason that we need to get into our building, we can write that email. There has not been a lot of what's the word, of having staff going in to do anything, quite frankly. So that's where we are.
Thanks, Anne. I'm going to pass the same question off to Katie.
Okay. So it's almost exactly the same timeline. Like, we found out on one day, and the next day we weren't allowed to be in, and that's where we've been. And it has happened. We've been updated regularly by emails from the director of the museum. Almost every afternoon at 4 o'clock comes a new email with, you know, updates. And there has been this, like, you know, these sort of timelines, like it's every 2 weeks, and then it's been revisited. So we still do not have an opening date that is. I know, Gus, there's been working groups formed for different protocols and priorities for reopening. So we're kept in the loop, but we had no real preparation. Just a few hours, and it's hard to wrap your head around what to gather in your bag or what you could carry home on the subway, like to work from home, because we weren't really thinking that clearly about that kind of thing yet. So not until, you know, afterwards, you know, in retrospect, you're like, oh, I should have grabbed that all those acquisition documents that I wanted to retype, or, you know, so there wasn't a lot of that thought, because you were a little scared. It was a little scary. So you were just thinking about getting home and being safe getting home. So not a lot of preparation.
If I may do a follow-up, you look like you're not at home, Katie.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I actually have gotten special compensation access for in the last couple of weeks on things. There's been some conservation staff that have been allowed in the building, not every day, just to check. Obviously, the paintings and the sculptures and the prints, everything that's still hanging on the walls that was there when we left has to be looked at. And even for the film department on the third floor, and we have film here, we have special collections items. So I'm here to just make sure everything was okay that way.
Thanks. And sorry, I'm Dawn. You're at the Academy as well. So is there anything that you had a different experience than your colleague?
Yeah, I want to say like 100% what Anne said was pretty much how it went down, but I do recall we were still kind of in that phase where we could still come into work and get some things, and there was a phase of where we knew this was happening, things were slowing down, people were starting to take laptops home and then coming back to work, but it really kind of went completely sideways on Thursday night, like around 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and they said they're shutting down the city. Like, no one except for essential workers are allowed anywhere. And so then the very next morning, really early in the morning, like there was a academy-wide email from our CEO, Don Hudson, and they said no one's allowed in the buildings. And so I was anticipating still having some access. So like I felt I put some things in place and I had some safeguards, and it felt like everything was pretty well buttoned up, but like I was still planning on bringing some stuff home with me. And then that went completely out the window. So Friday was like one of those days where you had all these grand plans to prepare yourself for everything, and then it went boom. So I think that was the hardest thing for me, is that we knew it was coming, but we didn't know that it was immediately going to go into shutdown that quick. So that was weird.
I'm muted. Anne, your hand was up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, at some point, Dawn and I should talk to you guys about the project that we were in the middle of. Like, it was the thing that we were doing the day that we were told to go home, which was to begin the formal review of materials that have been requested by our museum curatorial staff to exhibit in the museum. I don't really have much to report. We've got everything. It's all in piles and in our offices, but we are a little bit stuck right now with regard to that project. Anyway, that's an aside.
No, it's a good one, because that's an example of how we left things. Tiago, I'm sorry to put you on the spot as the non-American, but how did this play in Lisbon for you all?
So, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here and to know more about what's happening in the United States as well. We were looking ahead. During this crisis, we all were always having a glimpse of the future, or at least of the coming weeks, by looking at China and then to Italy. And then so we were more or less knowing what to expect. Of course, we had no warning of what was really going to happen. We received information that the national emergency state would be declared on a Monday. So on Thursday, I had a couple of hours to prepare one day of work, 24 hours almost of work on Friday. And the first thing that we did was to make a list of all the colleagues that shouldn't even be allowed to come to work on Friday because they had health risk factors. So with everybody that did come in, we organized the collection, looking into what needed to go back into the vaults. And because we didn't know, like all of you, when we would be allowed to go back. Still, on Monday, we quickly knew that reading the emergency decree, that archives, libraries, and museums would be granted access by archivists and also other staff for security and conservation reasons. So throughout the national lockdown, where all movement, not only activity, but movement of non-essential workers was paused, we always had permission to go check on the archive, and we did that every week.
And you kind of are, and these two questions, the first and second question kind of run into each other, and you were kind of answering the second one, but
Yeah.
were there any other steps that you took to sort of prepare the collections for a long time with less human interaction? I know at Washington University, we put tarps over certain collections that we were more worried about, or we did extra. So did you have time to do any of that sort of extra collections care to prepare things?
Honestly, we just put everything that was being processed or worked back to the film vaults, and we made lists of all prints that happen to be in traffic, prints from other mostly FIAF archives in Europe, and also other film materials that were belonging to other film archives that were with us because they were going to be duplicated or stored in our photochemical film lab. So, and we, of course, made a list of everything that we had in other archives, but very quickly, we didn't even need to write to our colleagues to say, please take care of our collections, because, of course, we were already receiving the same mails that we were ourselves sending out, saying we will take care of your film materials during the duration of however long this takes.
Thanks. So for the rest of the panelists, did anyone do anything else to sort of prep their collections or vaults for the long haul? Katie, first.
No, because we didn't have any time, but fortunately we do have our in terms of engineer, our HVAC person that comes in once or twice a week to the vaults in Pennsylvania, and so that has been reassuring to know that their things are being sort of checked, and temperatures and humidities are correct. So that was the main worry. But other than that, there was really no other preparation. Other than, having a quick time to call like FedEx and UPS and try to redirect deliveries and things like that. But other than that, no. As archivists, things are in vaults and they're fine staying there for a while, and they've always been, safe. So it's kind of, it's reassuring to know that they're just as they always were, from one day to the next.
Has that been, Anne, I saw you raised your physical hand, and how's that played out on your collections?
Yeah, so what you guys are getting at is what Katie just said is spot on. Like, we've got our things in our vaults. It's all good so long as we're getting, we've got regular security checks for temperature, humidity. And Dawn, I'm assuming, is kind of keeping track on that, and I haven't heard anything, so I'm assuming everything is fine. I think our biggest, or at least my biggest, from the point of we're getting ready to close to the public to go home for some period of time, the big part to me was like, hi, technology. All right, so who's got a work laptop? Who doesn't have a work laptop? Who's got network access? Who can we probably get network access to? All right, what are the projects going to be? And how can we share those projects around? So those of us who have network access, like, are there things that we can do? Are there lists that we can create using our network access that we can pass along to our colleagues that don't have network access? So that's probably, to me, kind of the big one that we dealt with in terms of kind of the quick planning and what the hell are we going to do?
Yes, Don, please.
I just kind of want to add into that too. So Anne mentioned that I'm trying to monitor, and I started at Academy about 6 years ago, and that was one of the first things I kind of tried to wrap my head around, because we have 4 different buildings, but we have 2 that have collections in them, and to not be at these buildings all the time or weekends, or if I'm away, because I was the only conservator at the time. So, and now we have a little bit more help staff. But one of the things that I did was really kind of work with facilities and security to try to see what our set parameters were in our vaults, and then also ask security to like ask them what their checks are. And so we've worked it out, and we had put this in place like maybe 5 years ago, once I kind of wrapped my head around everything, that security would do a check once per 8-hour shift, and we have 24-hour security on site, so that was really like part of their routine anyways. But now they actually come into our vault, they look around, like we've kind of talked to them about training and kind of did some hands-on training, and just saying like, please look for leaks, please look for anything that's fallen over or out of place, if you just kind of, you know, keep your eyes peeled. And then we also have them do temperature and humidity checks in all of our vaults. So they record that down, and then that's put on Excel spreadsheet. And then that Excel spreadsheet lives on a server that I actually have access to. So at any time, I can pop that document up right now and look, which is super helpful, because then I can really get an idea, and then I can reach out and say like, I'm seeing this, what are you guys seeing? And then facilities and I can kind of work on that, even though we're not 100% access there, at least security is. And they've been really wonderful. And even during the protests this weekend, you know, it was very easy to just kind of text them and just say like, how you guys doing? Are you okay? Do you need anything? And that was super helpful, because we had communication in place, but then also these kind of backup systems to monitor some of this. And I feel fortunate to at least have that in place, even though I wish there was more. I wish I had access to the library to do kind of conservation checks and make sure everything's okay. We're not quite there yet, but it's kind of on my list of things to do, and to say, you know, put it on our disaster plan if a pandemic hits. You know, can we put some of these things in place to say, what is an essential worker? What can we do to be preventative? Is kind of where my thought goes. But yeah, I feel very fortunate that we had some things in place in anticipation for this, but it wasn't really anticipation for a pandemic. It was more like, we're gone on the weekends. Who's looking out for this stuff? So just, that was my 2 cents for that.
Yeah, those are important points. And I think there's 2 things to emphasize there. One is, we're realizing at this point that we might have job titles like conservator or curator, but the importance of having everyone involved that works the institution playing a part. I mean, ideally we knew that already, but I think this just reemphasizes that fact, that you would have a security guard who is doing in some form conservation work, not exactly repairs, but is caring for the collections in the way that we know that they do, and the importance of people that are working on HVAC systems and stuff like that. The other point is realizing where we all work. We're well-funded institutions. That could be debatable now in some ways, but there's a lot of places that don't have the resources we have. And so one of the things that I know we're relying on, we're talking about facilities staff, we're talking about security, not every place has that. So that might be something to discuss in the Q&A. We can add some resources about cheaper, more DIY ways that you can put in, like environmental controls that are Bluetooth, that even if you don't have a HVAC facilities person, you can put that in your smaller vault, and then you could track that from home. So that's something I just was thinking about as well. So Anne, you were talking about this. So maybe you can start this question, but you're talking about is how do you work from home? So what new projects were you all had to develop for your staff, or how did you use this time away from the actual physical objects to think about projects that might work in the future?
Sure.
So if you could start that conversation off,
Sure.
and then we'll go around the group.
This is the part of work from home that has got me incredibly stoked. I don't know about you guys that are out there. We've got so many metadata projects, cleanup projects, right? That you've got queued up and you never have enough time because, you know, they're metadata projects and it's really tedious. We've got all the time in the world right now. So the metadata projects have just been phenomenal. I mean, the one that I am most astounded by is a staff member who, let me just point out, did not have network access to our resources and has created just under 8,000 records that will help us connect our objects to our work records. That's just, it makes me like this, pitter patter. It certainly made me rethink like how we're processing collections. So in terms of somebody that goes out in the field that brings in collections, I have been creating Excel spreadsheets, you know, and they're fine. They're fine. They don't handle images very well, but I've been trying to, we have just gone into a big new cataloging system in, what is it, Dawn? Maybe the last 2 years, year and a half, maybe, that we've been in AdLib. And so I've been looking at like how, when I create an Excel spreadsheet, like, is there a way that we can bring that in to create some initial records? Yes, we knew that, but now we are like, I am firmly like both feet in this. And we've done processing of born digital collections, the Liza Donnelly collection. Liza Donnelly is a New Yorker cartoonist. We have a collection of her drawings related to the Academy Awards broadcast at the library. That's fantastic. We had just taken in a collection called the Concept Art Association collection. These are born digital production artists. Their collection is all digital. We have done all of the processing on all of those collections. We have done pre-processing on some incoming collections that aren't born digital, but which had some kind of a digital component, typically a spreadsheet that we were working on. So that to me it's been fascinating and just super, super exciting. And I'll hush up now and I will let somebody else speak because I feel like everybody else is like, yes, this is the point. This is the awesome part.
I'm glad that something, the word awesome is used at all nowadays. It's nice to hear. Katie, would you mind discussing how you dealt with this at MoMA?
That emergency thing is happening right now. So can you go on to the next person?
Yes.
Yeah,
Dawn.
I would like to say, never mind. It just stopped. Never mind. Okay, it just stopped. Okay. I just want to just ditto everything you just said, Anne, because that's exactly what's happening with us. It started off like who already had VPN access, who setting priorities, who gets VPN access. So the collection staff started first. But it took a while because everybody wanted VPN, so it took a while for our IT team to address the queue. And so as we were waiting, the couple of us that had it were assigning these projects, like you just mentioned. And fortunately, we have our cataloger, Thelma Ross, has already worked remotely, so she was like, nothing's changed, you know. She was able to delegate some tasks once people gained access to our database VPN wise, and then and we're recreating new finding aids from scratch, you know, from PDF documents to Word documents so they could be searchable, like all those things you just mentioned that were on your like back burner that you always wanted to get to, we've been able to do. In addition to in the first week or so, myself and Ashley Swinnerton, our collection specialist, and a couple others were we got quick VPN access. We were scouring our network drives for all of our streamable video because the museum was planning on, you know, what they call virtual views online to set up screenings. And so that was an important task, to scour our network drives so they were easily accessible and didn't have to like physically go in and get it off of a drive. And so that was a big project. Fortunately, we had a lot of that on network drives from the recent reopening, our home movie show, Private Lives, Public Spaces. So we had over almost 200, we have access to almost 200 home movies and amateur films that we were picking from for that project. But again, yeah, the ability to mine all the metadata that we've been wanting to do that's been really great and very satisfying. And our collections team out in Pennsylvania all have VPN access now, so they've been like brilliant in doing and so diligent in doing all of that and coming up and setting new policies and priorities. And because we recently also migrated into a new database, the museum system, which is a collections management system, mainly, you know, for museums, but, and in all honesty, was not a moving image database, but we've worked with them over the past couple of years to accommodate our moving image metadata, and we're still working on that. Even though the physical migration happened, it's still a lot of work to do. So we're working on those projects and priorities. So it's been really great. Yeah.
Sorry, go on, what?
No, it's nice to say great. You're right, Andy. Like in these times, it's hard to, you know.
Yeah, and I want to say that home movie exhibit is just exquisite. You all did a great job. Thanks. How did this work in Lisbon? This issue of working remotely and how you get the staff to work on things and.
Yes, we also had to come up with solutions, which included providing laptops to people who didn't have a laptop at home, and this was an unforeseen situation. We had colleagues that did have computers at home, but were now forced to share them with their children who were, because the schools were closed, and maybe their spouses were also working from home. So sometimes there weren't enough computers to the entire family. Well, we did stop all the typical film inspection, cataloging, and film restoration in the lab. But we did manage to continue doing some work. For example, we did manage to transfer in that final day a lot of equipment to the homes of the digital lab team. So they were able to continue to work on grading films, for example. And that was important because some producers were waiting for those films because we were just finishing the production of archival images that some producer was going to use in a new film, for example, and that was important because without those images, the producer couldn't receive a last amount of subsidy money from the public funding scheme. So the motto and the effort was really to pay everybody, pay the salaries, pay all the suppliers, so that people could continue working from home. And also we went to the archive every 3 weeks or so to scan film materials that were already prepared, so that again grading could continue from home. Of course, now there's a huge pile of material that needs to be validated in the big screen, of course. We also took the opportunity. I totally understand what Anne says about the metadata and all the tedious projects that we might have standing by. What we did was something similar. We took this opportunity for those colleagues that couldn't work from home, people from the lab, for example, and other colleagues, and asked them to do manuals and procedures so that about the film equipment that we use. So we took the opportunity to finally write those manuals and to put in writing some workflows that are handy, especially when we have interns, and you always need that written set of rules that it's the starting point to train your intern. And finally, of course, we didn't have much of an online presence as a film archive, So we retasked a part of the team to curate and produce online contents for our website, and we did that well. We're just finishing now because we are allowed to go back to the archive, and theaters are reopening in Portugal right now. So of course, online presence, the free availability of movies has to stop when commercial theaters reopen. Yes, I know that was a huge debate, Portuguese society, well, in cultural circles during this period, an interesting discussion.
Yeah, there has been a lot of more access for people out, I can access stuff internationally now, so it's been an odd benefit. Don, how would you answer this question? And was there any ever possibility of you like taking stuff home to work on? Or I know that sounds crazy, but yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit harder for us to take things home because of the liability factor. So when we're in the academy buildings, we can treat things because we're insured. So it's kind of a breach to bring things home with us. So I have a team of there's just 3 of us. I'm a full-time conservator, and then I have 2 part-time conservation technicians working with me. So we are very limited by what we can do at home, but I've tried to get creative and tried to give someone a little bit of everything, but obviously no artifacts came home with us. So as far as treatment, that has completely stopped. But at the same time, I will have to say, the way things come to the conservation lab is by archivists processing them, or things that are requested for visitors. So since that stopped, because they can't access the materials either, it stopped for us. So our backlog has remained during this time, which is kind of nice. But I would say, since we can't do that, I've been focusing on for me, to like write policies and procedures like Tiago, write manuals to kind of put some workflows in place, updating some policies and procedures that we have access to. And then our metadata cleanup is a little bit different. We're having like, things that were on our servers that weren't labeled properly, like our treatment photography for before and after treatment. Like, we're just kind of going through and systematically making sure all of our naming conventions are exactly right, if things are in the right folders. And we're cleaning up some of that. We're cleaning up some exhibition records to make sure that all the documentation is in the right place. And so it's just kind of we're doing a little cleanup, but then I'm trying to give my conservation technicians some hands-on experiences as well, because that's what they're used to doing all the time. So and computer work is not always as glamorous. So I have one conservation technician that's very interested in bookbinding. So I've asked her to use some supplies at home that she has, or order some online, and we'll reimburse her to make a working model of a book. So like we're having her make a book that shows kind of like the sewing structure, the innards, the hard case covers. So it can be something that can be used in the lab to explain what we're doing to someone, or to explain what the process that we're doing for treatment, or could eventually be used as a display, when we have like kind of in educational displays. And then another one, my other conservation technician, Martha, she's working on honing her photo ID. So using her family photos, she's looking closely with a microscope, or just just kind of a little loop, kind of like like this one, just a little handheld one. Put this over the photograph and just doing a little bit of photo ID. So just kind of practicing, honing your skills. It just kind of breaks up the day and gives you a little bit like a feeling that you're gaining some kind of control over what we can do. So we're just doing little things like that. But I do miss the library and not being able to be near the collections, but I am very thankful that, we have enough to keep us busy at home. I'm with you guys. I have a lot of backlog projects that always get put to the back because treatment's more fun. But yeah.
Yes, for a conservator. Yes, it's more fun. No, I'm kidding. I miss our collections as well. The reason why I realize it sounds crazy to say take stuff home, but thinking about how the ways the international supply chains have been disrupted, archives and vaults by necessity are rigid spaces. And so that does make us more at risk, obviously, to these types of things. So I don't know how we become flexible, storage vaults or flexible conservators where we can do this type of work in different type of environments. We have created our workflows and our conservation spaces and our storage spaces to be inflexible by design. So it's just trying to think about that together. And one thing, Don, I really appreciate you mentioning there is you were talking about providing extra training and resources for your staff. So have there been other examples where you've done that? And also, I think this could be not just training, but also advocating for the jobs to continue. Where I think I can say this, I'll just say it. Where I work, there's been, I think, at least 20% of the staff has been furloughed. So we have been trying to advocate for people to continue to work remotely by jobs, and it's been successful and semi-successful. So I don't know if that's been your attempt at doing that, Don, is to give them more sort of job training. If you could start that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I will have to just kind of preface this by saying the Academy has been very generous to all staff. And they said, I mean, as soon as we were working from home, our upright management office has been very good at communicating with us that our jobs are safe. And we get kind of town hall meetings once every 2 weeks, is very consistent now. And every single time they're still saying, your jobs are safe. We're not furloughing everybody. We're paying everybody. They're trying to make sure that everybody feels safe and secure. And I think we were very fortunate because we had the Oscars early this year. So a lot of the revenue from running the Academy comes from that. So we were very lucky that happened just by coincidence. But I haven't had to advocate in that way, but I have tried to advocate in such a way that people feel like they still have buy-in and they're still connected to us. And I would say the other message that they've been sending home is one, like first make sure you and your family are safe, and then two, do things that make you happy, like part of work. So they've been very good to us about that. And I would say one of the things that I try to do is to try to give my team some resources to feel like because they're on the path to become conservators. They're what we call pre-programmed. So they're not in grad school yet, but they're getting the hours that eventually allow them to get into a master's program. So all of this stuff is going to count for the better in the end. But I've also tried to come up with other projects that could engage other people at the library. I reached out and asked some of my fellow library managers if they wanted to ask their staff if they wanted to help us make book futons, and it's basically a support for a book that can be used like in our reading room or when we're doing treatment, or if our catalogers are processing, the archivists are processing materials, and it's just a little book support, but you can make it at home. And so we just ordered supplies off of Amazon for several different people that volunteered and said, yeah, I'm bored, I want to make book futons. So I've tried to advocate in such a way that we could be a little bit more inclusive to the library staff with what some of the things that we do already in our department, and I feel like that's been really helpful. And I think it's come off really well. We actually have I think about 10 new book futons already, which is pretty great. But it gives someone to feel like they're contributing. So I think that's been pretty nice. But yeah.
Great. That's a good example of how we're having to be inventive at this point to include staff members. Anyone else want to, I realize this might be a sensitive topic somewhat. Anyone else want to address it?
I'll toot Amia's horn for just a second and say I took an Airtable seminar with you guys, and that is new software that we are using That was hugely helpful. We've got staff that kind of similarly to what Dawn is getting at, we've got staff that are working on projects for other departments. Our oral history department is getting a lot of love from a lot of different departments doing transcription and that kind of thing. So any kind of training that you can do online, we are absolutely supporting. I'm also supporting the watching of movies. You know, if that can contribute to your education and help your knowledge when we get back, then awesome, and more power to us.
Tiago, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say that we were fortunate enough not to have any staff furloughed. We are fully funded by the state as a national archive, and I'm sure that in Europe that was also not the case in many other archives. And now we are, of course, curious to see what happens next in terms of the huge economic and financial crisis coming our way, and to see how surely that will affect, from a structural point of view, our institutions. But for now, and during the crisis, and especially during the lockdown, the very strict lockdown, all the public servants got to keep their jobs.
Great. Katie?
Yeah, we had no furloughs, but what we did have, and this happened pre-COVID, was, and because of the expansion and renovation, they had asked for early retirement. So that happened before COVID, and then during COVID, more people took advantage of that very generous offer. So, and unfortunately for the film department, we took the biggest hit. Oh, there we go. I don't know if you can hear that, but they're trying the alarms again. I can stop while that happens, but can you hear that? Yeah, okay. I'll let somebody else talk, and I can continue that question later.
Okay, thanks, Katie. It's actually really exciting to hear workplace sounds. It's, in the interest of ending this part of the event after an hour, we're going to combine the next couple of questions and into sort of a two-parter. And so what these two questions are is, what are you thinking about doing to make the workspace safe as you're moving back? This is a question about the future. So how are you all thinking about making the workspace safe, both for staff, and also are you thinking about new ways of dealing with your objects? I'm thinking about a lot of the libraries are going to put books that are returned in quarantine for a couple of days. So that's the first part, and then the second part of this question is access to the collections for users, for other archives who are checking out your films. Is there any thinking along that? So moving forward, how are you thinking about it, both for internally and externally, I guess? And I don't know who wants to start. Anne, please.
Yeah, this has been heavy on our minds. So again, we don't have a set plan. We don't really know what this is going to look like. I can tell you about things that we are considering that might have application within the larger library, and then more specifically within our department. I suspect that when we return, it's going to be a staff will return first before we start seeing patrons. So one of the things that we are talking about is, you know, we work in very open workspaces. So how can we limit the number of us that are in a space like that together at a time? How can we limit that? And I'm guessing that is going to be a similar conversation to what we have about patrons. How can we, you know, we already see special collections appointments, but how are we going to, the drop-ins that come in just for walk-in service, how are we going to facilitate that kind of access? I don't have a clear, 100% clear answer on that. I will say one of the things that came up. So when I started talking to the graphic art department staff about, what are the things that you guys are concerned about when you come back? One of the big questions, or one of the big comments, was door handles. And so we're kind of looking at some things that we could use, like a what do you call it, like a foot pedal that would open the door, or do we have it's not clear that we can do that with all of our doors. So are there other things that we could do? We had just been talking about kind of a hand washing procedure for our patrons. And we were really getting ready to institute that. And I'm guessing that that's going to go forward without any kind of issue now. You kind of hinted at what the other thing that we are talking about, and we're talking about this for internal movements as well as external movements of our material. The creation or designation of drawers, shelves, areas within the offices, within the vaults, where things go to live for a certain amount of time when they are pulled by request to be seen by a patron, or to be digitized, or to be loaned. So both the quarantining of prior to the exhibition, if you will, and then quarantining again when they come in. There was something else I really wanted to tell you guys, and I'm blanking a little bit. Give me a second, just looking really quickly. The incoming collections, that's the other big one that I am just like, this is going to be really interesting. I will say that and I think Katie or Tiago kind of referenced this. I had 2 collections that were literally in transit when this all went down, and I know that the collections have been received. At this point, I'm assuming that we could go in and pretty safely open those collections, because they've been sitting in our vaults for 6 weeks now, 7 weeks now, 8 weeks. And then the very last act that I did officially was to pick up a collection. And that is sitting quarantined in plastic. And I'm assuming that, again, as soon as we are back, that's going to be something that we're going to break open. So I think the thing that I'm trying to struggle with a little bit in my mind is the idea of a contact-free collection pickup, which is challenging, I will just say from my perspective. It's doable, but it's a matter of how. So.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. Katie, I saw your hand go up. I do want to say, like, we're getting used to maybe contactless delivery when it's like they leave something on your front porch. It's very different when it's a priceless collection. That's not something you can like leave outside the door and then come and get. So Katie, your hand was up. Would you?
Yeah,
like
and I'll quickly answer, and then I'm going to jump off for a few minutes at 2. And then come back. Okay. Yeah, all those things Ann said, and also in terms of access, I think some of the things we're thinking through, especially for when we do reopen, it will mainly be concentrated on internal access and the collections as much as possible. I'm speaking more specifically for the film department and theater exhibitions. When they come back, we're going to try to program within our collection first to exhibit in our theaters, starting off before doing any external exhibitions. And as far as we're already getting so many requests for loans that we're continually have to decline, unfortunately, right now, and the study center requests. But fortunately, we have a lot of already in place social distancing, the way our offices are set up, and especially Pennsylvania, because they do that on a daily basis. They're all separated like 10 feet apart on a regular, So I think, but there's been, there's definitely a lot of procedure and policy in place about what Ann mentioned, touching and access to things like that. And if the museum were to reopen, when it does reopen, I should say, they've already thought through all the enter, exit, how many temperature taking, handing out masks, so many people per gallery, not being able to walk back and forth through a room, but keep continuing going forward. And then, you know, so to reduce the back and forth and spacing, and maybe no wall labels so people aren't gathering in front of a nameplate, or, you know, a wall label, because it's too close. And there's so many things that things are being thought through at this, but I mean, we're all eager to give access because that's what we want. We want people to see things, you know, and it's really hard for us not to touch things, because especially as archivists, but it'll, you know, it's going to be a whole new mindset of rethinking, and we have to be, we have to understand people's comfort levels and concerns and about all that. So that's another avenue to think of when we think of all these, this access. Yeah.
Thanks, Katie. Tiago, you mentioned movie theaters are open in Lisbon, and maybe you all are a little bit ahead of us.
Yes, I'm speaking to you from the future.
Yeah,
so
well, literally, because it's hours ahead of us, but also
that's too.
Yeah.
Yes, we've reopened the archive for physical work on the 18th. And we've reopened access to the collections on this Monday. We will open the theaters, our theaters, in July, but commercial theaters have been working since Monday as well. We do have a national health authority, so we have a very top-down organized way to communicate information about health instructions. So we really needed to do an adaptation work, and that was it, an adaptation work to the specific case of the film archive, of all the instructions relating to the workplace. I realized that it was really important, the last thing that Katie said, it was really important not only to think of the public, but also to think of the colleagues and the teams, to give them lots and lots and lots of information and training, because coming back to work is going to be a very progressive process in terms of regaining trust. Trust to be outside your house, trust to use public transports, and trust to be amongst your colleagues during daily work. So, and to do that, you really had to put in place all those measures. Our manual is 20 pages long with all the instructions, but it's stuff like you've already said. One important thing, that absolutely all access activities have to be scheduled ahead. No free entering the library or the film archive saying that I want to see this, only by scheduling your appointment first, limiting the number of places to receive the public, asking or demanding that all outside suppliers or visitors and the public will wear a mask and sanitize their hands regularly throughout their stay, having all those entry-exit paths clearly signed, and very important also, self-monitoring, which is a new routine. Every worker now has to by himself or by herself every day check for symptoms, and if any symptom is there, they cannot go to work. So this is a new routine that you really have to check yourself for symptoms every day, at least for the coming weeks or so, and this is something that we are going to have to do. I did have a note about this. Yes, we did check or recheck if all the HVAC systems had the most appropriate filters, checking all the categories of filters, and doing periodical sanitization and disinfection of the HVAC systems. Again, this is a good example. Disinfection of HVAC systems has limited and proven success in terms of destroying the virus if it is there. But it is a very important procedure to regain trust of the workers and of the public that visits our institutions.
Yeah, those are great points. And as an American, I'm jealous of a place that has a national approach to this. Dawn, I'm sorry, we only have about, we need to move on to the next section, but is there something you want to say in like 30 seconds?
Yeah, I can be really quick. I just want to warn everybody that handling paper-based materials, that hand sanitizer is actually going to cause more damage. So there's a resource that's a link to on your resource page about the Library of Congress. They did a short little research about the dangers of the hand sanitizer, alcohol, lotions, other additives that can actually cause deterioration of your paper product. So really washing your hands with soap and water, having them clean and dry is best, you know, but preventative for yourself for the virus, you know, quarantine is still like the best case. And they're saying that they can stay on several surfaces for many days, but 9 days is the limit right now is what they're seeing. But there's lots of resources out there, and I really recommend that you just start reading some of these. One of the most recent one is by the Canadian Conservation Institute, and you could just do CCI COVID, and it's gonna explain a lot. But I just want to put that out there. Just please do smart things with your paper materials. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And that's why we wanted to have a range of people on this. Okay, thanks everyone for this awesome discussion. We're gonna take a 5-minute break so people can catch their breath, get a glass of water. So we'll mute our videos, and then in 5 minutes, Brianna will come back and we'll have the Q&A for the audience. So see everyone back in 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I think we're just waiting for people to come back gradually. But while they do, I actually was taking notes while the rest of the panelists were talking. And I can say a few things about, just from the Film Archive's point of view and the Preservation Department, about some of the things that were discussed. And I know for the Film Archive, which as Dawn mentioned, the Academy of Motion Picture Sciences is actually 4 buildings, and the Film Archive is just one of those 4. The Margaret Herrick, where Dawn and Anne work, is another. So we are working with security to check humidity. I myself am not doing that. Our vault manager is, but that is how they're making sure that everything is stable and that our vaults are managed. Obviously, we've had to cancel a lot of loans. Again, this is not my department, but I would be happy to check in with our access department as well as our traffic manager to see, you know, how they've been handling that. I don't know what their thoughts are for when we come back, since I assume that a lot of the programming that was canceled, there might be an onslaught of people trying to reprogram that. So I'm happy to reach out to those people and mention that tomorrow in the next panel. The other thing, as far as the rest of us who deal with physical film, we also did not have a lot of work laptops or access to our server or VPN. And so there were quite a few projects in the first month or so that people were working on to basically keep busy and be able to work from home. Some of those things were helping our access department with writing collection profiles. Some people also updated Wikipedia on different Academy Award films and nominees so that things were updated. We helped the cataloging department transcribe credits for Academy nominees and award-winning films. Another thing that I did personally was that I created an Airtable database for a preservation project that Access and Preservation were collaborating on so that they could share information. And I know someone in the traffic department is also working on, you know, making a lot of documentation where before that was just part of a training process and not necessarily formalized into documentation. So we did focus on that. At this point, as far as I know, most of the people at the Film Archive either have a work laptop or access to the server or VPN, depending on their position and what they need. I personally work on a contract. I have a 2-year contract working on a specific collection, which deals with a lot of film scanning. So one thing that I've been doing is I've been doing a lot of the QC from home and cataloging all of those digital files that were generated so that when I go back to the archive, I can focus on the film inspection and handling that is necessary to get more material to our vendor. So we, at least in my position, we've had to kind of rethink some of those workflows. When I went into the archive to get drives, I know that our HR department is using an Airtable database to trace where people are going exactly, how long they're going into the archive, and what they're getting, so that if someone does test positive for COVID-19, they can have a record of exactly where they were, you know, who they interacted with as kind of a patient zero. And as Anne and Dawn mentioned, the one thing about the building at the Film Archive is that although we are kind of spread out when we work, we all use one elevator. There are only 2 stairwells that everyone has to use, and the common areas everyone touches. So that is something that I don't know exactly how they're dealing with yet. One thing that has been discussed is how can we, you know, reorganize our workspaces. For the preservation department, I know a lot of the preservationists have offices, so they plan to move their film benches to their offices. I do not have an office, but luckily the room that we inspect film in has 2 doors. So we discussed the possibility of, you know, we can have 2 people in that room at once, and each person has a designated door, and the room is large enough that those two people can remain relatively separate. So that is something that I can share as well. Let me see here, what else? Oh, and then I know some of the other preservationists are working directly with vendors so that they can, you know, kind of try to work on things remotely with post houses. So they're working on that. Obviously, we can't take film home. And I don't know where this is at, but because we have a theater, there has been some talk too that people can screen things at some point in time with the projectionist to give them some work because the theater is quite large. So I don't know where that's at, but it was discussed as a possibility. Yeah, we didn't have, as far as I know, any documentation in place. And also, you know, when we have film donations, the donors generally come drop them off at the archive. Obviously, they can't do that right now. Sometimes I know, and again, this isn't my department, collections will go to the donor's house to get those collections, or even sometimes the preservationist might go. So I can also ask them if they're thinking about new procedures when they're doing, you know, going to a donor, interacting with them, getting a collection, just because certain people in the archive have pretty close relationships with some of our donors, and so they're the point people for that. But it is an interesting question. And to the audience members in general, you know, I had some people ask me, you know, why are you having people who have experience in conservation on this panel? And my answer is because in my experience, the conservation community has a lot of documentation. Like, a lot of this has been formalized, and I think that especially in a time like this, there's a lot that we can learn from them, and hopefully they can learn a lot of things from us. Like, you know, what are some of your documentation for handling things? Like, how have you dealt with sharing files? What are your workflows for that? Tomorrow, we're also going to talk a little bit more about, you know, new security measures that people have to think about from working from home. So in the resources document that we're sharing with you, we do have some of those resources. And you can obviously reach out to us if you have more questions. But just like what Dawn is saying, that, you know, before, when we weren't thinking about some of the things that we're handling or how we're working with our collections, we do have to consider that now. So anyway, I think we're all back now. So we do have a few questions. I'm just going to start in the order that they were given. And the question was, if anyone took measures for flammable or dangerous materials that were out of the vaults, or how did you monitor the conditions inside the vaults? And I think that, Dawn, that might also go in regard to fugitive media, if you're dealing with any of that, which is, I'll let you explain that, but I think that would probably also apply to this question. that pretty similar at MoMA, Katie? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, just, oh yeah, no, similar. You know, thankfully, like I mentioned earlier, we have some the people we pay on a regular basis that come in 1 to 2 days a week have continued to work. So they're checking all vaults and the temperatures and humidity. We also have security that have eyes on PA from New York. So that's reassuring, and temperature control gauges to monitor. So everything has been okay. And we're nitrate in the building in New York City, so that's not a concern at all.
Yeah, we have a nitrate curator who's very diligent about monitoring all of our nitrate, and she keeps track of everything that comes in and out of the building. Obviously, there are limits as to how many reels of nitrate you can have, even just in a cabinet, which is never exceeded. So I assume that we manage that similarly. Before I move on to the next question, John, can you just define fugitive media, because it's more of a museum term? Yes. And I think we already answered this. There was a question about research disaster preparedness for archives, and if remote work is something that's covered in documentation. I think we discussed that earlier, that it isn't really, but that in this process, I feel like we've had to kind of make a pretty aggressive shift to accommodate that. I know, at least at the Academy, there was, I think, some hesitancy on giving everyone access to the server or the VPN, which now is kind of out the window. I don't know if that's different for you, Tiago or Katie, but I think we discussed that a little bit earlier. There's another question about the percentage of assets that are video in our organizations. That might be a good question for Tiago and Katie. We don't have much at the Academy. The majority is film.
What, is the question access to video now, or?
No, assets. So what percentage of the assets, approximately?
Well, you know, I'm thinking also about our Born Digital, if you want to include that in that, because that's increased quite a bit in the last 10 years. So in combination of the film department and the media and performance art department. So there's quite a bit in of video and film that we've been strategically transferring, well, the analog video to digital files. But I mean, obviously all that slowed down. I don't know, I missed some of the 15 minutes of our talking, so I didn't know if anybody was talking about that. But I don't know a percentage, but we certainly, our film collections remains the large, you know, the analog film with 30,000 titles, so that remains the largest.
The same. We do have an important collection of video, born in video work, and of course, since 2014, we have been receiving contemporary production of Portuguese cinema in digital support for preservation, for digital preservation, whatever that means.
And then I have a question from Matthew Wilcox, who's the audiovisual archivist at Michigan State University, and he's saying that he's finding that the VPN limits him from accessing preservation moving image files in order to make and create derivative files remotely. And he's wondering if any of the panelists or their coworkers are experiencing similar difficulties. I mean,
this is a question from Matthew Wilcox. Yes. Well, I can say that we had similar VPN limits, so we actually didn't do it this way. So we limited the VPN access to a very small number of staff, so that we couldn't, so that wouldn't degrade the quality of remote access to the essential colleagues that really needed to access remotely our servers. But again, as I said earlier, some portion of the equipment in the digital lab were taken home, so that work could be done outside the archive during this period.
Yeah, and for us, our media conservation team has had access to the digital repository, so they've been able to pull files that, derivative files for streaming and things like that. So I think they've been given some priority with the digital media team to do that. So I don't know. I mean, I haven't had any issues. I mean, even though there's a lot of people, I think, there's a staff of 700 here, and I think several hundred, or at least 300 people have VPN access right now. So I think that's been, and it's been increasing even more, so.
And MoMA has a pretty robust digital asset management system then?
They do, yeah.
So that might be the key.
Mm-hmm. Fortunately,
yeah.
Yes, we're very fortunate in that respect, yes.
And this was touched on, but someone was asking about how we're handling loans and exhibition items that were out but scheduled to be returning. Anne?
Yeah, I can take that if you guys don't mind listening to like somebody that's dealing with non-film material. We're in a lot of conversations with, I've got some posters that are at a museum, I believe it's in upstate New York, that they should be home by now, and they are not. And we are just monitoring that situation just to see, like, do they have any idea when they are going to open, and once they do open, how quickly do we think it might be before we can see our stuff come home. So just trying, I would just say from our point, to be as flexible as possible. It hasn't changed any of our work processes. So if somebody's coming to us for an exhibition, we have a process in place, a committee that meets monthly to look and review those loans and compare them all together so that we can come up with something that that protects our collection and also gets it out there at the same time. So none of that has really changed. It's just a whole lot of communication and a lot of it by email. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, as far as I know, and like I said, I'll check in with the traffic department on this because that's really, they're handling it. But as far as I know, I don't think we're receiving anything. So I'm pretty sure that there was communication just for people to hold that. I mean, we have security that would accept something that was delivered. But I'll get back to you on that. And I know we have 2 minutes, so I'm going to ask one last question, and then the questions we didn't get to, if panelists wouldn't mind, I can send those to you via email and then put the answers in the resource doc, if that sounds good, just so like we get to everyone's questions. We have a question specifically for Tiago, and the question was how you dealt with the photochemical lab in the absence of staff. For example, the chemical baths of developing machines, have they been emptied? And she said, the person says, thank you for the amazing panel.
Hello, Julia. Hope everything is fine and safe in Outubro. Not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. Yes, that's what was one of the things that we were able to do during the lockdown. My colleague also named Tiago, that you know, went to the lab to prepare the lab for a prolonged shutdown, and that involved, yes, emptying the chemical baths or checking which ones could maybe not need to be empty right away. And one of the first things that we had to take care of was coming back to the archive and putting the photochemical lab up and running again to dispose safely of all the old baits that we couldn't use anymore.
Okay. Well, it's 11:30. I don't want to go over in case people have other appointments that they need to get to. So Andy, why don't we close out? I'll send the remaining questions to the panelists, and I'll get those to everyone in the resources document that the link was shared with.
Yes, thank you, Brianna. Thank you. Please, everyone, join me in thanking Anne, Don, Tiago, and Katie for participating. Clap wherever you are, wave your hands, whatever. Again, this is for AMIA and other people working in cultural heritage preservation. If there's other topics people want to talk about, email us and we can move forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Brianna. Thanks, Laura.
And and we're going to put up a slide that's going to have a survey that we'd really love you to fill out. And on this survey, it just helps us know, how the panel was. It's going to help us with upcoming programming. And also, if you want to help with the zine, you can definitely help us with that. I just want to thank all the panelists today for participating, and the rest of the continuing Education Advisory Task Force who helped make this possible. So with that, I hope everybody has a great day.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.